All right, good evening, everybody. We are delighted to have you all join us for this important webinar. This webinar is a program of the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign, which is a joint project of the Wisconsin Council of Churches and Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. And we are going to hear tonight about the upcoming February 16th election, why it is important, what's on the ballot, why these offices are important, and some information on how you can vote and take part in our electoral process. I am delighted to welcome our speaker, Eileen Newcomer. Eileen is the Voter Education Manager for the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. In her role in the State League office, Eileen coordinates the League of Women Voter Wisconsin's nationally recognized election observation program. She manages the League of Women Voter Wisconsin's voter education efforts and supports local leagues in their voter service work. She has nearly 10 years of experience in the nonprofit sector and earned her master's degree in socio-medical sciences from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. When not working, Eileen spends her time with family and friends and traveling and volunteering in her community. And I've been privileged to get to know and to work with Eileen as part of the Wisconsin Voting Rights Coalition over the last year or so. She is a wealth of knowledge and information, and we are excited to have her join us tonight. So Eileen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you so much. That was such a warm welcome, and it's been my privilege to work closely with you, Bonnie, in the Voting Rights Coalition. Yeah, so what are we doing here? It feels like the elections just happened. What are we doing with new elections happening? And yeah, there's local spring elections coming up, and I'm happy to share information about what's going to be on the ballot and how you can make sure your voices are heard. I have some slides here, so I'm going to share my screen. But just before I begin, I'm going to share a little bit more about the league, just to make sure that we are kind of all on the same page about, who I am and what we do. And with the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin, we're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization of women and men committed to making voting free, fair, and accessible for all. We're staunchly nonpartisan, meaning we don't support or oppose any political parties or candidates. And our mission is to empower all voters and defend democracy. We know democracy is better when more people are involved and when our representatives reflect and are responsive to the communities they serve. And access to voting is inherently an equity issue, and it's one critical way we share power in our country and in our communities. As a grassroots organization, the League is built from the ground up and relies on the work of dedicated volunteers who do outreach and advocacy work in their communities. And we have 20 local leagues around the state. So we got elections coming up. When are they? The February one is here before we know it. And actually early voting is going on right now. So if you have not voted absentee and want to vote early before election day, there are a lot of opportunities to do so in your community. And you have the 2 weeks before the 16th to do so. And then, or you can vote on election day on the 16th. And then the spring election is on April 6th. Again, you have 3 options on how to vote. You can vote absentee by mail, you can vote early 2 weeks before the election, or on election day. And polls are open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. So make sure you make your plan to vote and help other people make their plan to vote too. So I know, every November, they're kind of like the big elections that are on people's radar, especially with the presidential and then the gubernatorial. And so sometimes people ask me, what's on the ballot for the spring elections? And this spring, voters are going to be deciding the future of our schools, our courts, and local leadership. There's actually approximately 6,000 offices up for election this spring. And they include the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Court of Appeals, Districts 1, 2, and 3, a special election for State Senate District 13, a special election for State Assembly District 89, a circuit court judge, and then a bunch of local nonpartisan races, and I'll go into further detail about them here in a minute. The ones that have a primary are bolded on the screen. So those are the ones that could be on your ballot for the February election. Circuit court judge has a primary in Fond du Lac, Greene, and Kenosha counties. And then the local nonpartisan races really depends on which community you live in. We're going to jump right in. There's a lot of information going on the screen here, but I wanted to show you some of the resources that the League has available to help people understand what these offices are and why they matter to average Wisconsinites. So the first one is the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. So what do? They run the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. They oversee public schools and libraries. They promote schools. They evaluate the performance of schools. They are an elected representative and serve in 4-year terms. They provide a lot of support to schools. They propose the budget for public schools and distribute funding. They also provide a lot of resources for students with disabilities and make sure that schools meet their requirements to provide assistance to students with disabilities. And they really play a key role in deciding school curriculum choices, education for children with disabilities, educator quality, public library resources, and educational opportunities. The next one that I wanted to go over is the Wisconsin Circuit Court. And anyone who cares about inequities in our justice system should care about who is elected to our courts. Voters decide who our judges are, and we are ultimately the ones accountable for whether our judges are impartial and fair. So there are 3 different levels to the Wisconsin, actually I guess there's kind of 4, but there's 3 main levels to the Wisconsin court system. There's the circuit court, which is kind of what I'm going over now, and that is the main trial court for Wisconsin. So this is where cases are introduced, where the fact finding happens. They hear almost all the cases first in civil and criminal matters in the state. And again, they are elected. And so their rulings decide a lot of issues if you're before the court, whether it's for family law disputes, civil rights disputes, any sentencing for people who are convicted of sentences and things like that. And so on the screen, you'll see a couple other options too. So they are kind of the first tier to the court. And the second tier is the Wisconsin Court of Appeals. So there are no Court of Appeals races on the February election, but they will be up for election in April. And so the second tier is the Court of Appeals. And this is where if people want to appeal a decision that was made at the circuit court level, they can appeal to the Court of Appeals. And they have to hear all the cases that are appealed to them. And they will rule in favor of one party or another. They don't do any fact finding, but they do make a decision about whether or not an important legal error was made in the decision by the circuit court. There are 16 judges and they serve in the 4 districts. The map on the screen shows you kind of roughly where the 4 different districts are in Wisconsin. And decisions made by the Court of Appeals can be appealed to the Supreme Court, which is also our elected offices in Wisconsin, but there are no Supreme Court races on the election this year around. So again, we elect these judges to serve on our behalf and to be impartial judges. And so it's important for us to make sure that we know who we're electing to be on the bench and make our voices heard. Um, and also, they set important precedent for the interpretation of laws in the future. So this seems maybe kind of, I don't know, maybe a broad concept, but there are a lot of times where these precedents come back and can really make a big impact on our lives here in Wisconsin. So what are some of the local races that you could encounter on your ballot? Like I said, this really depends on your local community. These are all nonpartisan offices. So you might see county executive, county supervisor, mayor, city council, city clerk / treasurer, a school board member, and sanitary commissioner. If you want to find what's exactly on your ballot, I would recommend you preview your ballot by going to myvote.wi.gov, and you can see exactly who's on your ballot, so they can help you do some research on who these people are. And so, why do these races matter? They are your key local leaders that make decisions about your communities, and they're responsible to you and your neighbors. They make a lot of decisions on public transit, school quality, affordable housing, policing and public safety, sanitation, water quality, job training programs, and more. And they also decide where millions of local tax dollars are spent. Many municipalities are the leaders on issues like environmental sustainability, public health, and job creation. And things that maybe you can't get attention at the national level can get traction and build from the local level. And so it's a really great opportunity to make change in your community. Local elected officials also represent fewer people, so they're typically more responsive to your personal and community's needs and interests. These local officials are also supposed to represent the majority, but if only a few people vote, then they only actually represent a small part of the community's interests. And so the higher turnout we have, the more reflective our local representatives are going to be, and of the community that they serve, and more responsive they're going to be to the community that they serve. So how do you decide who to vote for? I am not here to tell anyone who you should vote for, but I want you to have some tools and resources to think through so that you can make your own decision about who you want to vote for. So some key steps that we kind of talk people through is to, one, decide what you're looking for in a candidate. What issues are the most important ones to you? What qualities do you want in a leader? And which of the candidates' priorities align with your values? So it's helpful for you to do this kind of introspection so you know what it is you're looking for. Step 2 is to learn about the candidates. So take some time, do your research. You can visit their websites or social media pages if they have them. Look out for candidate forums or interviews. A lot of local leagues put on these candidate forums or post candidate interviews, and they're a great opportunity to learn about the candidates. You can visit vote411.org, that's the league's website, and I'll share some more information about that in a minute. And you can also seek other nonpartisan sources of information, or ask people what they think, people that you trust and you want to get their perspective on who to vote for. Another thing to look out for is, what are their qualifications, and then also what are the priorities of the candidates that are on the ballot. And then step 3 is to kind of meld these two things together and sort it out. Decide which candidates' priorities and views best match your own priorities and views. Think through who you think is the most prepared for the job and who has the leadership qualities that you're looking for. So kind of putting all those 3 things together, that should help you decide who you want to vote for and who you think will best represent you. So one of the barriers that we hear that prevents people from voting is that they don't know who to vote for and they have a hard time finding candidate information. So here are some resources that you can use to help you with your research. Um, the top one, the one with the image, is vote411.org. That's the league's resource. I will say I'm biased. For the state level candidates, I'm the one that puts those guides together, and I think it's been very helpful for me to find more information. And I know it's been a really good resource for people in my network as well. And so what we do is we send out questionnaires to the candidates, ask them to respond in their own words, and whatever the candidates want to say, we publish for them. We also translate their responses into Spanish, so it's available in both English and Spanish. I mentioned candidate forums. Like I said, the league puts on a lot of candidate forums. We have one coming up for the state superintendent public instruction race. We actually had another one last month, and the recording is available, so that's an opportunity to learn more about those 7 candidates. But there's a lot of local candidate forums and opportunities to learn about the candidates as well. Oh, I also forgot to mention for Vote 411, a lot of our local leagues participate in Vote 411 as well, and they provide local candidate information. So when you're looking for information on school board or county executive or city council, a lot of local leagues go through quite a bit of work to provide local information as well. And it can be pretty tricky sometimes to find information about those down ballot candidates. I know one that Bonnie has been promoting is Ballotpedia. I found some good information there as well. And they've got a wealth of information. It's also helpful to go to the candidates' websites and social media pages if they have it, because that's where they are going to post their platform and talk about the issues that are most important to them. So it is a good way to learn more about them. And then you can also take a look at the news articles, interviews, public forums, or discussions about the candidates to kind of see what other people are thinking about them as well. So some other resources to help make sure you're ready to vote later this month in April. First one is myvote.wi.gov. This is the kind of voter hub for the state of Wisconsin. You can register to vote on this website. You can request an absentee ballot. You can track your absentee ballot. You can find your early voting information and any drop boxes for your absentee ballot if you don't want to send it back in the mail. You can also find your sample ballot and find your polling place if you're planning to vote on election day. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for all things Wisconsin, and is very helpful. And I always encourage anyone who wants to help others to vote to really get familiar with this website. The other website that I have up right now is the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin's website. Again, I'm kind of biased, but I think we've got a lot of really great information for voters on our website as well, including links to the fact sheets that I shared with you, some information about the state superintendent public instruction race, the Court of Appeals, and circuit court fact sheets. And we have them available for you to download and print, and you can share them and kind of do it whatever you want to share them as resources for people in your community. We also have information about kind of all the basics of voting and a link to Vote 411 where you can learn more about the candidates. And then I also want to point out that the League, in partnership with the Dane County Voter ID Coalition, have the voter helpline available. This is something that voters can either call or text to the 608-285-2141 number, and they can get help with answering any questions about voting that people might have, whether that's how do I get an ID to vote, can somebody take me to the DMV, I am voting absentee and I live alone and I need a witness. Is there somebody who can come to my house to be my witness? They're willing to dispatch people to give in-person help if needed, and then also to answer any questions that people have over the phone. Sometimes people, for the majority of people, voting is pretty straightforward and smooth, but there might be some things that are kind of hiccups for you in the system. It can get kind of complicated pretty quickly, so it can be helpful to have experts that you can reach out to get information from and to help you navigate the voting process. And then I did want to leave people with some ideas of things that you can do right now or soon to help get out the vote for the upcoming elections. You know, definitely make sure that you vote, make sure that your friends and family vote. Let them know that they can vote absentee or early. Some people think that voting absentee was a special thing just for the pandemic last year, but they don't know that here in Wisconsin, we are a no excuse absentee voting state. So anyone can vote absentee who's eligible to vote. You can also do some advocacy with your local city clerk to try and expand early voting options, Dropbox opportunities, and then also to just making voting more accessible for your community, whether that be more opportunities for voter education or things like that. You can sign up to be a poll worker. I actually heard today that City of Green Bay is looking for poll workers to help in their central count. And I have a feeling they're not alone in needing poll workers to serve in the upcoming election. So if you've got some time on election day, reach out to your municipal clerk and see if they need some help. You can also call your municipal clerk and see if what their plan is for the pandemic, making sure that they've got enough supplies, enough staff, enough locations to make sure that they're operating in a safe manner so that when the community comes out to vote, people are safe doing so. You can encourage multilingual voting information for your municipality. So only a couple areas in Wisconsin are required to have bilingual materials, but just because your community maybe isn't required to, they can still provide those materials, and it's a great resource for people to have. Use the accessible voting equipment, and we always welcome people to join the league. We're doing this work all year round, and we know that every election matters and every vote counts, and we're always looking for people to help us in our mission to empower voters. So I think now we're kind of in the question and answer time. I am happy to answer any questions that people have. My contact information is on screen, so I can also put it in the chat if people want to have questions afterwards. I'll also share some links in the chat to the fact sheets that I shared and mentioned.
Great. Well, my name is Peter Bakken. I'm the Justice and Witness Coordinator for the Wisconsin Council of Churches, partner with Rabbi Bonnie Margulis and Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice on the Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign, and I will be handling the questions. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. You'll see two little interlinked word balloon icons, probably next to the chat, wherever these things are appearing on your device, possibly at the bottom of your screen. If you would enter that into the Q&A box, that's going to make it a lot easier for me to follow than trying to go back and forth with the chat. So please enter your questions. I will read them and Eileen will answer them.
Peter, while we wait for people to type into the Q&A, can I ask a question or two?
I think you can.
So Eileen, can you say a little bit more about using the accessible voting machines. They are for people with disabilities. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm happy to share more about them. Yeah, so the accessible voting, so every polling place in Wisconsin is required to have the accessible voting equipment. These are machines that allow people to vote privately and independently. And they are there so that people with disabilities can use them, but there are also people who don't consider themselves as having a disability that would benefit from using the equipment. Um, and then as far as like you using it as maybe an advocate to help, if you use the equipment, then you make sure the equipment is set up at your polling place, that it's working, that poll workers know how to assist somebody in using the equipment. So what we have found is, although the equipment is required to be available, it doesn't guarantee that it is, or it doesn't guarantee that it's set up right, or that the ink cartridge isn't dried up. And so, or other times, people think that the equipment is only for maybe people who are visibly disabled. And so if only one person uses that equipment at your polling site, their ballot is not private because they're the only one that has that printer ballot as opposed to a pen marked in ballot. And so that's one of the reasons why it is helpful if more people use the accessible voting equipment.
Thank you. So it normalizes using those machines,
Yep.
and so people aren't singled out.
Yeah, that's a better way to say to say it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see somebody wrote something in the Q&A, but real fast, can you also put into the chat, because I know January 7th, the League of Women Voters hosted a really great forum with all the superintendent candidates. And I watched it and it was very helpful. And I know there's a recording available. And you also have another forum coming up, is that right?
Yes, there's another one coming up on February 11th. And I can put a link to that and then also the recording in the chat. I'm happy to do it. I know I watched the forum as well that we had back in January, and I learned so much about the candidates. And sometimes it can be hard to differentiate when there's so many people, and it was very helpful for me to learn more about them.
Thank you.
Yes, Rose has a question. She says, our media in Milwaukee has said nothing about early voting. How come?
You know, I can't speak for the media in Milwaukee, but I know that one of the reasons why it's so great that you all are having this event and this webinar is to put this election on people's radars, because it is kind of flying under the radar, especially with so much attention still being given to the November election. The February and April elections are going to happen, and if we don't do something to let people know about them, then people aren't going to know, and then they're not going to vote. So I do wish that there was more attention being given to the election and press about people's early voting options and opportunities to vote absentee, and then even just basic information about the dates of the election.
Thank you. More questions?
I just put the wrong link in. Sorry about that in the chat. I'm trying to do too much.
Oh, and one thing I should have mentioned was that if you're watching this webinar on Facebook, you can enter your question in the comments and we will try to snag those and have those read for Eileen as well.
Eileen, in addition to poll workers, are you also looking for poll watchers for this election?
You know, not for this election. We typically run our observation program on even number years. And so we would run it in the April election and then the November election. It would be nice to be able to do it every election, but this, I don't know, I only have so much capacity. And I'll be honest, I'm still writing the report from the November election. So I don't know that I'd be able to do both. But we are going to put out our voter experience survey after after the February election and after the April election. And that has been a really great way for voters to give us information about what they experience on election day, whether it's like things that are really good that they want to make sure we know about their polling place, that maybe could be replicated at a different location, or if it's a barrier that they faced. That's helpful information for us in our advocacy work so that we can try and make sure that those barriers don't exist in the future.
Great, thank you.
Yes, and there's another question from Beth, who says, I always thought I could only work the polling place in my village, but a friend worked in Milwaukee. How do I do that?
Yes, you can work the polls in any municipality within your county. So if you reach out to your municipal clerk, they don't need anyone, or you can ask another municipal clerk and see if they need any help, or in Milwaukee, they have the Milwaukee Elections Commission, so they'd be the people that you'd reach out to about helping out in Milwaukee.
Eileen, Bonnie's earlier question prompted one for me is do you have any tips for somebody who does run into a problem at their polling place of some sort? What should they do if they're running into some sort of obstacle?
So if you're running into an obstacle on election day, I would recommend calling the election protection hotline. And the phone number is 866-OUR-VOTE. And if you call that hotline, get connected with election protection lawyers who can help you sort through your individual situation that you have. Although one of the things I would recommend to anyone is the earlier that you can start working through the process, the more time you're going to have to address any issues that you come across. And so, for example, it's much easier to register online before election day. And if you come into any hiccups, you have more time to address those before election day. Same thing if you want to vote absentee, the earlier that you do it, the better, because let's say you don't have an ID and you need one in order to vote, that'll give you more time to go and get that ID so that you can cast your ballot and make sure that your vote is heard. So I'd say give yourself time. It's probably my biggest recommendation, and then knowing where there are resources and people there to help you.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
I see a question from Peter in the chat and asking about whether or not there are local leagues across Wisconsin and how you can get involved with the league. Great questions. We got 20 local leagues around the state. And like I said, we would be very happy to have you join us. I can put a link in the chat on how to join if you want to.
Okay, another question. Sonia asks, when does early voting start?
So early voting happens 2 weeks before the election. It used to be a lot more, I'm like not thinking of the right words, but I want to say loosey-goosey as far as when the dates and times could be. But actually recently, in the fall of last year, the Seventh Circuit Court ruling came down, and that limited early voting to being just the 2 weeks before the election. And the dates, the specific dates, times, and locations of early voting is going to vary from municipality to municipality. So the best person to reach out to find out what your local options are is your municipal clerk. They may also only offer it by appointment only. that most often happens in like small towns or villages in the state, but every municipality has to offer some form of early voting.
Thank you. And then Beth has another question. She says, my husband has not received his absentee ballot yet. I received mine over a week ago. Should he have received his by now?
I think he should have received his by now. So on My Vote, the website that I shared in the presentation, you can go and you can track where your absentee ballot is in the process, whether your request has been approved, if it's been sent in the mail, the anticipated delivery date of your absentee ballot to your home. So I would suggest that your husband look at My Vote to see where his ballot is in the process, but also take action as soon as possible. Maybe just call municipal clerk and figure out where the ballot is. Yeah, they were supposed to be sent out, gosh, I think the 23rd was the date. So if you had a request already on file, the 26th. The 26th is when they're supposed to be sent out. So it's been a little over a week. So I would say I think that you should have your ballot by now, and it's definitely worth following up with your clerk to make sure that you get it in a timely manner so that you have time to do your research on the candidates and time to get it back to your clerk.
Right, thanks. Yes, that was a very helpful question. Sonia also hadn't received her ballot, and we'll check My Vote. And then Beth has lots of great questions. She says, what is the most effective way to end gerrymandering?
That's a great question. I would say the league is really involved in the fair maps, I guess, advocacy work, where we want to make sure that districts are fair and that voters are electing and choosing the representatives rather than representatives choosing their voters. We would encourage anyone who's interested in doing this work to join the league, to be part of this. The new map lines are going to be drawn this year, so it is, really important that we all speak up and tell our representatives that we want fair maps, and to pay attention to it and make sure that we can get them to be as fair as possible. So the state legislature is going to draw the maps. They're going to go to the governor for approval. If they can't agree, it's going to go to the courts, and that's likely where it will end up, but we'll see.
Okay, any other questions?
Eileen, there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation around the November election. Where can people go for good information about the security of the election so they can help make sure that their friends and families have trust in the election process?
Yeah, I think it's always best to go back to the official source of information. And that's one of the things that we at the league try to do is make sure that we're always pointing people back to the official source of information. So one of the reasons why I talk up the My Vote website is because it is the state of Wisconsin's official voter information tool. And so similarly, I would point people either to their clerks, so they can learn what their processes are and procedures are and information that they might have available to the public. And then also the Wisconsin Elections Commission has a wealth of information on the steps that the state and local government does to make sure that our elections are fair, transparent, and to do their best to make sure that the voters can be confident in elections. I would also say one of the good things about Wisconsin is that we have a very transparent election process. So people can observe any step of the election process. So if you're concerned about it, or people who are worried about it, let them know that they can go and they can be observers themselves and see how things work. And rather than relying on hearsay of oh, I heard this happened here, they can actually go and have their own eyes on the process. And that's one of the reasons why we run our election observation program, is because transparency is great, but if nobody's looking, then transparency is then you're not doing anything with the transparency that you have. And so we want to make sure that we have people who are out there and are the eyes and ears of citizens, kind of taking advantage of that check that we can play, and making sure that our officials are accountable to us.
Great. Any more questions? Well, I think going once, going twice. You can certainly follow up with Eileen or any of us if a question occurs to you afterwards. That often happens, but I think, Bonnie, it's my turn to just kind of wrap things up. Oh, okay. Well, it's a thank you that this has been helpful. So that's really good. I appreciate that. It's good to know. I wanted to just mention, I know we've got some people who are familiar with the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Campaign that we've been working all last year around sort of the major national elections and state elections, trying to bring folks from different faith traditions together to engage with the electoral process, to share information, to participate in all the supportive ways, poll observers, poll workers, sharing information with their friends and neighbors and fellow congregants. We didn't get to do all the things that we were hoping to do because of COVID, but we held a number of webinars giving people information about elections and voting rights, racial disparities, legal challenges, different faith perspectives on caring for our common life through voting and other means of civic engagement. And we are continuing that this year. We're going to be doing many of the same things around elections as we did last year, because we've got, as we've discussed today, those important elections coming up this year. Making sure that people have the information on how to vote, how to find information about voting, how to find information about the candidates. And, as Eileen mentioned, when the media sort of falls short on educating people, we have a role as people of conscience, goodwill, and people of faith to get the word out, because we know how vital and important having a thriving and a strong democracy is, and how much that depends on active voter engagement. For those of you that are maybe less familiar with the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign, we do have a website, interfaithwivote.org. And we have a newsletter that goes out each week with all the information we can gather about the elections, about the voting process, where to find information about candidates, where to find information about voting rights legislation, educational things. And we'll be continuing that. We'll be following up with everyone who registered for this webinar with the recording, and we'll include contact information and let you know how you can sign on to that mailing list. In the coming year, we will also be focusing on what we kind of think of as the next step. We voted, the people that we voted for collectively have taken office, and now it is time to hold them accountable. Now it's time to be building and strengthening the relationships that we as constituents have with our elected leaders. Voting is not civic engagement. Being a citizen in this sense is not a matter of just voting, when that comes around, and then kind of ignoring things otherwise. We all have a role in continuing to communicate with our legislators and letting them know what's important to us, letting them know how decisions that are being made or not being made are impacting our communities, our friends, our family, and our neighbors. And so we will be promoting things like voter education, advocacy education. We'll be looking for new ways for different faith perspectives to share how they understand our, individual and collective responsibility for the common life. And we'll be looking particularly at legislation relating to voting and voting rights. I think that we can expect a lot of legislation after all the experience of last year. There's going to be a lot happening, I would predict, on that field. And we've got a state budget coming up. So there's lots of things to pay attention to, lots of ways to follow through with our responsibility as voters. And I think with that, we can probably wrap things up. Thank you all for being with us. We look forward to continuing to work with you in the coming year on strengthening our democracy, working together across communities, across faith traditions, and so on. So anything you want
Thank
to
you,
add?
Eileen, so much for being with us and speaking with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to come back anytime. And if people want or have any questions for me, feel free to share my contact information with them. And I'm happy to answer questions that people have later too.
Great, thank you. And I put in the chat the URL for our website and Facebook page for the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign. Great. Well, thank you all. Everybody have a wonderful night, and look for our weekly emails because they'll be chock full of information.